Liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission to build, resupply, and to do research on the International Space Station.
Houston now controlling. Atlantis begins its penultimate journey to shore up the International Space Station. Atlantis now on the proper alignment for its 8.5-minute ride to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Outpost. 30 seconds into the flight. Atlantis almost 2 miles in altitude, almost 6 miles downrange from the Kennedy Space Center already, traveling 500 miles an hour. The 3 liquid fuel main engines now throttling back to 72% of rated performance, going into the bucket, reducing the stress on the shuttle as it breaks through the sound barrier.
What a great day we have planned today to talk about having an outstanding webinar. And this is going to be so much fun. I started with the space shuttle. And there's a particular reason. It's not just a random thing. When I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut. Instead, I became a business consultant. And I think the two are so far from one another. But this idea of hosting an outstanding webinar, I think of it this way. If we look at the space shuttle had 135 missions, 2 solid rocket boosters on the outside of that, producing 1.2 million pounds of thrust. There was about 1.1 million pounds of fuel in those solid rocket boosters, producing 11,000 pounds per second, burning at 11,000 pounds per second. The maximum altitude the space shuttle reached was 386 miles above the Earth in an elliptical order. I think it was the orbit. It was the Discovery mission, I believe, moving at 17,500 miles per hour, and spent a maximum of 17 and a half days in orbit. Now, here's the interesting thing, I think. If the space shuttle can do this, if people can do this, well, surely you can host an outstanding webinar. I'm Jason Todd, part of Thinker Growth Community, here with my friend and colleague, Paul Edwards. I have started and exited 4 companies that have gone on to do about $100 million in revenue. I have hosted over 500 streaming hours across live streams, podcasts, and more. And I've advised hundreds of startups and high-performing teams. I'm excited to produce this training for you today. Paul, buddy, welcome.
Jason, so good to be here. Paul Edwards, 3 times best-selling author, ghostwriter to executives, thought leaders, and CEOs. CEOs are executives, but anyway. Published in multiple books in finance, health, wellness, and personal and professional development. And faith-based business leaders hire me to authentically and faithfully channel their voice in print. Delighted to be here. And, as you were talking there about the rocket, about the liftoff and the incredible thrust that is created when those machines are hurled into the sky at such a breakneck speed to defy the barrier of gravity on the Earth, I was thinking back to the power a well-orchestrated, well-performed, well-delivered webinar has to create relationships that have a similar kind of lift, in that you, as the influential person, as the teacher, as the authority figure, have the power to transmit useful information that viewers can latch onto and use in their businesses, in their lives, in their projects, that thereby create a bond that who knows where it could lead. So good on all of you for showing up today. And take what we teach you today and use it in your webinars, because you never know where you will find that next relationship with Lift.
Absolutely. I want to cover our learning objective today, because we're going to spend about an hour going through how to produce an outstanding webinar, which I think is so important, because so many people produce webinars by getting on their cameras in their underwear in their living rooms. And you don't know if I'm in my underwear or not. I'm not, but you still think is pretty cool looking. The learning objective today is to uncover some of the process, technology, and tips so that you can host an above average, and I truly do hope, an outstanding webinar. When everybody's creating content in the world, it's important to be able to stand out. And there are technologies and processes that you can go through that are easily accessible. We're going to be demystifying those for you today. So here's today's roadmap for the next hour. We're going to talk about planning your webinar, the process for that, promoting your webinar, the process for that, the content development process. We're also going to be covering technology and tools behind delivering your webinar. Not only how do you create the content, but how do you deliver that to your audience? And then we're going to talk about using webinars in double duty, reuse and redistribution. At the end, right before we part for the day, we're going to be talking about the webinar power process that Paul and I go through to create a tremendous amount of content, not only for the free Thinker Growth community, but also for the private community. That exact process. We produce webinars every 1 to 2 weeks on a variety of topics. And then we have Q&As that we host as well, all I think at a premium level. And we're going to walk you through those as part of today's webinar. Paul, it's good to see you.
Good to be seen. Thank you. I also have my underwear on, by the way. I don't. I should just mention that. The question is that all I have on, or do I have more than that?
It's a mystery. It's going to be an outstanding webinar, though. Let's talk about planning. All right. Planning. I think the first question that everybody should think about when producing a webinar is, why do you care?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only your audience, why do they care, but it's, why do you care? Why are you producing this content anyhow? And I think there are two major questions or two major answers on that. One is the pride of it. Hey, I want to produce this great webinar. But the other part of it is your webinar probably should be part of a value ladder. Now, yep. Paul and I use this again as part of our free community and private community, but the webinar is sort of the tip of the iceberg as part of that value ladder. It's free, valuable content, which we put out into the world, which when we then back up with very in-depth trainings that go even further into this content. But either way, somebody leaves with one big takeaway, which again is I think another important aspect of delivering a webinar. What's the big takeaway? And I invite all of you, even right now, to be thinking about, what is one thing I would really like to learn today? And if I could learn that, I know my hour has been tremendously valuable and leveraged for my coming year. And then there are next steps and being iconic. What are your thoughts on those, Paul?
Well, we always want to be telling people when we're doing a webinar, look, there's more than we can say in 60 minutes. And I think most of the time, the people who are tuning into the webinars that we produce are, to some degree, influential thought leader, speaker, thinker is the name of the group, right? We're talking about people who have high overdrive minds, a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom, something to share, something to say, a message to spread. So for us, it's very much about how can we be the right dynamic duo, as it were, to help you spread that message a little bit further than you would do on your own. So when you're doing a webinar, let's say you're a financial advisor, let's say you're an attorney, let's say you're working in operations or something like that, and what you want to share are bits and pieces of information that is useful to potential clients, whether they would be working with you in a B2C fashion, like that, you're a financial advisor, or you're training people who are your peers, but you've become an expert in that field. You've risen above to the next level, so to speak. So you're always going to want to set before people, what is the next right step for me in my career, in my business? And when you get to the end of that, you need to give them something that takes them a little bit even further down the trail than you've already taken them. So when we're working on books, for example, that's a huge question. What should this tool do to take the reader one step closer to me as the author in the funnel, in the process of us building that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that is a hot topic right now is this idea of being a thought leader, which is a nebulous concept. And Frank here's got a great comment about that. I think that a lot of people propose to be thought leaders. I was having a great conversation yesterday with a publicist, and he was talking about so many people are on repeating the same little sound bites, but they have no experience. And if you look at, and I'm not tooting my horn, but if you look at my past experience, it's pretty in depth. And I didn't do that to become popular. I did it because I wanted to do cool things. Smart people doing cool things in a cool way, which has always paid off. And then getting the message out there, is an important part of that. How do you pass on this value information, which is, I think, part of being iconic? What are you known for in the spaces that you are seen? Be consistent with your delivery, be consistent with your look and feel. That's branding. And then you might have sponsors who become part of your webinar as well. And I do want to address here before we move on, these live chats which are coming in, and feel free to put those in there. I love them. Bill, you talked about this idea of how best to market new webinars. We're actually going to get into promotion in our next section here in just a couple minutes. So hang on for that. And then Frank here, I want to read this. This is important information. What separates an opinion from real substantive and real information? It is experience, I think. So I've got a podcast called What Works. And the idea is that if there was a top 10 list in the best way to do things, then why are we all creating new top 10 lists? And the fact of the matter is what works for you might not work for me. And what has not worked for you might work for me. So there are some consistent, I think, foundational things that we can cover, which work across time, which work across cultures, because most people are the same fundamentally. And then we build on that ways of accepting or receiving information, which change through time, which I think does also get us into this idea of promotion, because promotion changes. We've got a picture of the funnel there, that the idea of prospects and leads turn into potential clients. We always want to be asking or answering the question, what's in it for me? Because we are all asking that question. You're here today, and I guarantee that question is going through your mind. What's in it for me? And
Why should I pay attention?
For sure, absolutely. And so just a handful of pieces of information, and I love these comments, and we could talk on this for hours, and we can do that on a different podcast or a different webinar. But for today, we want to answer what's in it for me with one big idea that we talked about earlier, and then 3 takeaways. Because we're not sure, when we put our message out in the marketplace, we're not sure what version of that takeaway or that big idea is going to stick with our market. And so we're talking about building an outstanding webinar, but somebody else, and I've got this idea of how to in there. That's that word, outstanding, webinar, free. And then we've got a couple different versions of messages in here that we've been iterating through. But we always want to use photos and faces as well. There's actually a piece of our brain, part of our brain, that is programmed to look for faces. It's why we can look at a cloud and we go, oh my gosh, I see that face in there. No, you don't. Your eyes don't see faces. Your brain has a little part of itself that looks for faces. And so when you throw a face out there, and LinkedIn actually has some research on this recently, that part of the posts that actually connect are selfies. So if you take a selfie, people connect and engage with it more because we are looking for faces. Use photos and faces. And then where do you promote? Obviously, across all of your social media. I think some people overlook the idea and value of an email list. We think, well, maybe we're all just connecting over Facebook and LinkedIn now. Not true. email is still very valuable, and you should be mining or farming in that email. And then graphics. Again, there are easy ways and easy tools to create graphics. We're going to get into those in a little bit. Be thinking about the text that you put behind these, and then use video. There's no excuse for not using video, and there's no excuse for not making it high quality. We can talk about that later. And then audiograms, which we're going to get into in just a second here. Any thoughts on these items before we show people what an audiogram is for those who are not familiar?
Well, certainly what I always emphasize to people is when you're promoting, there's what I call a sliding scale of promotion. There's soft promotion where you start to build up toward it, and then there's hard promotion. So when we talk about there at the end that the timeline is usually beginning just softly a month out and then concluding a week out, where you're actually messaging people directly, inviting them to events, saying, here's the link, please join in, et cetera, et cetera. That gives you the opportunity to create some reciprocity, a wellspring, in other words, of interest in what you're promoting. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the ways you do that. The other thing that I think that you mentioned there that you had on that list, Jason, is the audiograms, which we're going to get into in a minute. And those give people an opportunity to interact with what you're talking about, to gauge whether or not it's of interest to them, whether we're answering that question, what's in it for me. And we've seen that work with webinars that we've done in the past, where we've created an audiogram from it. We've then set it before people. And as a result, there's been more and more interest in the next one we're putting out.
Yeah. This is key because up to 85% of videos used on or watched on Facebook are watched without audio. Now, how is this important for webinars? When you're taking that micro content, when you're taking that short content clips from the webinars, which we'll talk in just a little bit about how to do that very easily, you have to be able to produce captions and perhaps transcripts. So we'll just give you a quick example of an audiogram here. Now that audiogram there was produced from a planning session that Paul and I did. We record our planning sessions. We're going to get into our power process at the end of or near the end of our webinar today to unpack how we produce mass amounts of content through our planning process and also through our webinar delivery, which allows us to utilize social media, I think, in one of the most powerful ways, which is to pass on information. Memes are fun, but pass on some truly valuable information to your audience. And by doing that, you can make best use of all the parts. Use all the parts of the pig, so to say.
Yeah, you want to engage on as many in as many avenues as you can. So if there is somebody who would catch it through watching, sad to say, a lot of people watch this while using the restroom. It's true. So why not take advantage of it? Why not create something that they can watch with the sound off? Why not repurpose it into a blog that you can publish if you have a well-read blog? Why not turn it into the substance of a podcast episode? If it's good enough, why not take the audio recording of it and release that as a podcast episode? You'll find people doing that all the time if you pay close attention to what people with popular shows and podcasts and outlets are doing. So we should do no different.
Moving on, we want to talk about content development. So we've talked as an overview about planning. We've talked an overview about promotion, and we can go really in depth in these things that we do in our private community. But let's talk about content development, and we're going to start unpacking some of the tools that we use to produce all the content that we produce. Number one, obviously, write an outline. Not only an outline for the content that you want to deliver, but an outline for the script that you're going to follow during your webinar. I think that's vitally important because we need to or should be rehearsing the content before we put it out there. Now, again, I've delivered over 500 live stream hours, so this is a bit of second nature. Give me some bullet points and I'll go ahead and get on camera and speak. But when you're delivering a significant amount of content in a defined way, rehearse it.
Yeah.
Even today, we refined a bit of the content that we're delivering today as part of our rehearsal process. So we use Google Docs. Paul and I are on opposite sides of the US, it seems. We use Google Docs to create our outlines, to create our scripts, and then we work either synchronously through a video planning process, which we record, or asynchronously. He'll review things when I'm sleeping and vice versa. We use slides, obviously, Google Slides in this case, but Canva for creating some of these slides, simply because it's a convenient way to create high quality slides. Because Google Slides has some features and functionality, but I tend to like some of the creative aspects or ease of creating creative. That's a weird way to say that Canva allows you to do. Let's do that 10 times fast. Ease of creating creative that Canva allows you to do. See, there you go.
You also mentioned giveaways here, Jason, and I think as we have moved through creating several webinars, what we've found is a lot of times the content that we talk about in our planning sessions or the content that we actually set before people can also have a written value. You can take a session where you're talking about a particular topic. Let's go back to the beginning of this webinar and say we started out with being clear on why you're doing it, being clear on what's the value to the person watching it. You can take that and turn that into a checklist, because you can ask a bunch of questions and say, have you thought this through? Have you done some research? Have you interviewed people in the space? Do you know what's important to them? Do you know why they would tune in to something like this? Can you list it out? And you can use that as a handy worksheet, which you can then just give to people so that they can think through it and not have to do as much guesswork. And if in the process they find that they're stuck because they realize I have this tool, but I'm still guessing, I'm still really not sure, well, then that positions you as somebody they can turn to for additional help.
Yeah, we are very fond of using all of the parts of the pig. So we've got the planning process, which we record. We've got the content, which we put into our outlines. We have written books together and taken pieces of that. We talked about in a different webinar, this idea of the cutting room floor, the things that you develop now, which you've maybe cut, for today's webinar, just keep it around, because you don't know when you might want to deliver that in the future. Maybe even in a little quote graphic that goes online. But if you keep all of your ideas, keep all of your content, you have a tremendous ability to reuse that. We also talk about making sure that you write your email, text, and instant message follow-up sequences in advance. There is no reason to get to the end of your webinar and then think, oh my gosh, how do I follow up with people? Write the whole process down in advance. Spend a little more time up front so that you can deliver that in a more coordinated and effective fashion after your webinar. And then we want to also talk about this idea of the design of your webinar. We talked about writing the content for it, the content you're going to deliver, but also the script. What are you going to do today to deliver that content? And in this case, this actually follows very closely to what we're doing today. We've got an intro and a countdown, which if you've never thought about using an intro and countdown, it's so vitally important, because it takes a bit of time for people to get into your webinar. They don't arrive on time necessarily, but when you start your live stream, the platforms send out a message in a lot of cases to remind people that that webinar is starting. You got to give people time to get in. Today's countdown was about 1.5 minutes. So anywhere between a minute, minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes, have a countdown that's running, make it visually interesting. There's no excuse to not to. And we're going to get into some tools that you can use to create those videos very quickly and make them fun. Also, interstitials or ads. If you have something that you want to sell to people or a sponsor you want to talk about, have those ads created in advance. You can click a button, and we'll show you how to do that in just a little bit. You can click a button and you can deliver that ad. People are used to watching television. People are used to seeing an ad. And then also your outro. How are you going to close up the webinar? I think you don't have to, do the traditional thing of just like, okay, goodbye, and then click a button and you go offline. You're absolutely welcome to do that. But I think a more professional way to do that is to have a video that plays right at the end. Could be a sponsor video, could be a promotional video for yourself, could just be a fun little video. Show people a cartoon. Make it fun.
That's
Why
the
do we have to?
expectation, yeah.
Exactly. And I think to elevate your content and delivery above the fray of everybody creating content, because the barrier to entry is very low, use some of these tools to simply make it look more professional. You can do that. There are tools available to do that. Get obviously your slides, your videos, and your graphics together to do that as well. So let's get into some tools that we use to create outstanding webinars. Number one of my favorites, obviously, Google Workspace. I've used it for years. I've consulted with clients and moved them to it. Microsoft obviously has Microsoft Office 365, and there are other tools as well. But Google Workspace, I think, is a foundational tool for anybody who's starting out in collaborative space and wants to retain their work. Canva. If you've not used Canva, I invite you to get connected to Canva. Canva has tools to make just about any graphical thing that you want to create. There are templates ready to rock and roll. The Pro account is super cheap. And I'll show you in just a little bit how we can create a ad in Canva in just a matter of moments. So I'll show you an ad in just a little bit that I created in about 15 minutes. iMovie, I happen to use iMovie on the Mac. There are other tools, some that require a bit of a learning curve, and there are online tools as well. RenderForest is an interesting one for creating videos. I specifically use it for intros and outros, and then I've also used it for some longer form videos. But it's great for creating logos and intros and outros, anything with graphical movement. Descript is a fantastic tool, and we'll unpack how we use that as part of our content creation process. But Descript is a great tool to pull in video, automatically create transcripts, and then edit the video using transcripts. If you want an in-depth overview of what Descript is, you can head to Descript.com, or you can get in contact with me. We're actually creating a video on that. I'm not a paid Descript spokesperson. I just happen to love it. And then I'm using Restream today for the live content delivery, and I use that for Coffee with Humans and What Works and all the other stuff that I do for live streaming. It's one of my favorite tools. StreamYard, I have used StreamYard in the past, and they've come a long way. Look into StreamYard, but Restream and StreamYard are kind of the same thing. And then there's OBS and Derivatives, which are installed applications on your computer that can elevate your broadcast to more of a television quality. Most people, it's way more than what you might need, and it gets a little bit scientific in nature. So these are the tools that we're using today to create this webinar. But I want to show you a quick ad that you can actually create. I created this about 15 minutes on Canva just to demonstrate for you the quality of graphics and videos that you can create. You can look super pro. Here we go. All
I
right.
never knew you could do that in Canva. I was always like, I thought, you just make little square images with multiple colors and fancy cursive handwriting.
Yeah, you thought there was just little graphics and quotes. Yeah, no. There's so much more you can do if you know how to do it. And we can help you demystify that. Frank, you've got a great question in there. Are we going to mail out a list of the tools that we just mentioned? Yes. We have tools and checklists. Just simply DM us for details on that. We'll get those out to you right away. Now, content delivery. I'm a techie, and so I tend to keep these tools as simply second nature for me. But there's content creation. So right now I'm sitting in I'm using a web browser and Paul's in his web browser, and we're using a tool called Restream, which is taking our video from each of our setups and merging it into one on their servers, and then it's sending that video out. StreamYard also does the same thing. Sending the video out to endpoints. Now those endpoints are where you are consuming the video on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. There's other things like Wistia and Vimeo and Twitch, but not every webinar has to be live. You can actually, and I've done this before, take a recorded video, perhaps a webinar that you already delivered, and schedule that so that it seems like it's live. So this webinar is being recorded. It's being recorded in Restream. I'll download it, and I've got a cool process that I go through to create a lot of micro content off of that. But that is now recorded, and I can click another button, and we could just schedule this on Thursday at 10 a.m. and not even be on it. It would go out to all of these endpoints, and people could consume it. People could chat right into there. So you can do live or recorded webinars. And again, all of this exists in your browser. If you're using Restream or StreamYard or some of these other ones. There are other tools. Again, I mentioned here Vimeo and Wistia, which have their own in-platform or platform-specific tools where you're going to record that content, or you're going to do your live video, and it's going to go out their endpoint. It's going to go out Vimeo's servers, out Wistia's servers, to perhaps your website. So you might embed that in your website, so that your audience is not going to Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube to consume that content. YouTube obviously has live capabilities as well, but again, we've got Restream, which packages all this stuff up together, and I've got a whole little control panel here, and then it's sending it out to the folks on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook. Paul, is that clear? I know I try and make it as simple as possible, but I know I might gloss over all sorts of things because I'm a bit of a techie.
No, that's a good explanation. The one thing that I remember you mentioning in our previous conversations that I think is useful for some people to know if they're targeting that audience is Twitch. And as I recall you mentioning, part of the reason is that that's a very captive audience that spends a lot of time in front of screens. So if your audience is accessible via Twitch, that's a really gaming heavy part of cyberspace, but it's a very captive audience. I look at my 14 and 12-year-olds. They're not on Twitch, but the amount of time that they spend in front of Fortnite, if I could find a way to reach them through Fortnite and they were my target client, I would do that.
So I've got a podcast called Coffee with Humans, which is not only a podcast, it's a live stream as well, where it's a candid conversation where I talk to strangers and we become friends. And that actually broadcasts over Twitch, because the type of consumer or type of audience that will watch a video game will also watch a candid conversation between strangers who become friends. So Twitch is an interesting platform. You can evaluate whether that makes sense for your audience or not. All right. The content process. What do we do with all this content? Now, we've got before, during, and after that we want to cover for your webinar. Before your webinar, invite your connections. Now, this is something that is often overlooked. People create an event on LinkedIn, but they don't click the button to invite people. I think I invited something like 1,000 people at one point for a webinar. You can invite everybody, or you can narrow it down by location or company or job title. Invite your connections on these platforms. You can do it on Facebook as well. Post reminders. Not everybody is as interested in your webinar as you are. And and particularly now, this time of year where people are thinking about Christmas and all sorts of things, post a gentle reminder. Uh, I did a TikTok video the other day, which based on some information, Paul, that you and I were talking about, where it takes 27 to 30 impressions for people to even become aware of your message because there are so many messages every day.
Yep.
So you need to up your content game to even be known sometimes by your closest friends because they're busy people too. They love you, but they've got their own lives. So certainly think about posting reminders and then message all the attendees before or during or after. We've got messaging on the after as well. And then Paul, you want to talk us through this idea of what we do during our webinars?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for people to remember when they're doing a webinar, Jason, is if you have the ability to divide out the duties during a webinar, if it's live, especially if it's live and interactive, but even if it's recorded and there's bound to be some degree of feedback to it, you want to be in a position to respond, to thank people, to send follow-up messages. All of that takes time. All of it takes energy. All of it takes planning and foresight. Because you can't just, there's some stuff you can respond to on the fly, like a question in the chat during the live time and it's poignant and it's relevant to what we're talking about. Absolutely. But if it's anything close to that, but not quite that, anything like a request or somebody's having trouble accessing it, somebody got the wrong information, there's somebody supposed to be on the guest list, any number of things could crop up. So you'll see there on the slide, there's a process that you go through when you're taking people through the webinar. There's a countdown, right? We've covered that. There's a greeting. You come on and greet. You set the expectations. You set the tone. You deliver the content. Every 10 to 15 minutes, we try and break it up. So every 10 to 15 minutes, we move on to a new topic. We're sort of good at subtly prompting each other. You may not notice it, but we do that many times. Mention your sponsors and your giveaways. If you've got a checklist or a tool that you're going to give away, if you've got a company paying to be associated with it, paying to be mentioned, don't leave that out. Make sure that's in the order of operations so you don't miss these steps. And last but not least, when you get to the end of it, make sure there's that call to action. Make sure that the people who take time out of their day to tune into your webinar know what are the next steps if I'm interested to go beyond this point.
And we've actually divided some of our responsibilities today, which is something we typically do on our webinars. You're watching the LinkedIn channel and you are commenting on that. Restream, the tool that I'm using, has chat features in there. So I can see the chats coming in, and so can you, Paul. And I can chat back if people are on YouTube. I can chat right back to them right out of Restream. So I don't have to leave the live streaming platform. But sometimes it's a distraction. I got other things going on. I got my slides here that I'm moving through, and I've got other things I can click. So I've got to click this button here and put down at the bottom, hey, get replays, checklists, and more. Join the private community. All of that is written in advance. But let's say somebody comes up with some new question like you're talking about, who addresses that as part of the live stream? It's great to have a third party who comes into there, an assistant or something like that. If you've got a lot of stuff going on, we're a bit pro at this, so we know how to handle a lot of this stuff. We're going to move on here in just a little bit to what do you do after the webinar. But first, I want to mention that I think it's a super pro to have a little outro at the end of your webinars, and we've got a cool one at the end, so don't miss that. Instead of just saying, okay, bye. But after your webinar, be prepared to package that audio and video so that you can reuse it. Not only reschedule and maybe restream the whole thing, but you can package all that content into micro content. We've got a whole process that we follow called the Power Process, which I'll walk you through here in just a little bit. But webinar double duty. Use all the pieces of the pig. In your webinar, doing double duty here, we want to be clear about your next steps for your audience. But let's say they missed the webinar. Have those clips ready to go to a podcast or clip to an audiogram, which we showed you before. Use the components of the audio. Uh, you can separate the audio from the video using some tools, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Again, Descript is one of my favorites now. But you can also do video redistribution. You can make clips from that long form video. You can clip it to a shorter but still long form, let's say 15-minute video. And then you could take short form or micro content, maybe 30 seconds of video clips, or minute of video clips, or again, those audiograms. And then you can reschedule that webinar for delivery if it's appropriate for you. Now, this is super powerful. If you're doing a top 10 ways that you want to engage with a financial advisor, you don't have to deliver that live every Tuesday at 10 a.m. You can schedule that and just have it go out. You could schedule it at 7 a.m. and noon and midnight to catch your audience. And you could run it across Twitch because you want to catch young gamers. All sorts of opportunity if you use these platforms for what they're designed for. And then something that people overlook is this idea of using the transcripts. If you use a utility like Descript, which we use, you can pull a transcript off there, edit it, and then turn it into a blog. Some people still read. I just wrote and published a book. And Paul is an expert at publishing books. People read. My brother does not. I had dinner with him on Saturday. I said, "Hey, did you read my book?" "No, I don't read." All right.
Well,
that's fine. But he will consume a video.
And don't forget, like when you're doing this, since we're talking on the written word there, having content like this, an arsenal, a stack full of blogs and different topics, makes it a little bit easier for you to begin approaching other outlets where your content can support their blog or their podcast or their YouTube channel, and saying, "Hey, do you need extra content?" They always do. And you get a few of your pieces of content plugged in there that backlink to your webinar. It's ranking up your optimization. It's ranking up your online presence. It's making you more and more ubiquitous every time your target client is searching online for what you do.
And again, if we're talking about needing 27 to 30 impressions before somebody even begins to notice whether to take action on your offer, you really have to up your content game. And there's no reason you can't with today's tools. All right, let's get into the webinar power process. We've got about 15 minutes left. Here's what we do. Paul and I, we have all of our planning sessions recorded. We happen to use Google Meet for this, and sometimes we've used Zoom, but planning sessions are recorded. Sometimes I will record client conversations and record those, and then we clip those to perhaps quotes or to audiograms or to short form or micro content, which would be, let's say this, but in a minute and a half. We have our webinar sessions that are recorded, and those are sectioned off as course overviews. So we will go into the power process. That will be one major section. And then we will get into very detailed course development later. But the webinar sections are recorded. The replays become available to the private community. We also refine the course outlines based on the content that we have delivered, not only from the planning session and rehearsed, but also during the webinar. Then those clips are used across social media, and the course details are developed again during the planning, refined during the webinars, so that all the parts of the pig are used. It's a fantastic process, and really honest. It reminds me of recording your ideas. Ideas are like gold. So many of them you're not going to use. But I've got a journal, and every time I have this idea of everything, I get an idea, and I'm just like an idea generation machine. I'll write it down, and I'll either put it in my handwritten journal or I'll put it on my electronic journal, and then I'll write a brief paragraph of what that thought is. It's not just the title, but a brief paragraph of what that thought is, so that I remember it and can reproduce that idea. Because that idea might not be applicable now, but it becomes part of a different idea that I might be using 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And I don't want to lose those things. In the same way The planning session, how many times have you looked at you've been sitting there with somebody and said, man, that was great. What if we could tell people? Well, now you can.
Yeah.
Just be diligent about recording.
And don't throw anything away. Put it on the cutting floor sheet. Keep it stored somewhere. But you can always go and refer back to it later and say, I've spoken on this somewhere before. You said something about this before. I remember you saying it, but where would we? Oh, we have it in our archive. So why not?
You've been
Why bother having to reinvent the wheel again and again and again?
You've been very diligent about that in a lot of your book creation processes. And I know that when you develop an outline, you write that chapter and then you think, oh, that chapter doesn't fit, or the half of that chapter needs to go. Don't throw it away. Keep it.
Yep.
Pull a quote out of it. Pull one paragraph out of it and turn it into a little quote box and send that off onto the interwebs. In the same way, again, record your planning sessions, record your webinar, and then reuse that, especially if it looks pro. If it's, again, you sit in your underwear, rethink the whole thing. I don't know. Why do we do that? If you could look at a progression of this thing called Coffee with Humans, and I want to touch on this a little bit. Coffee with Humans, I launched it in April of 2020. And it was me sitting in my dining room, super not pro. It wasn't even called Coffee with Humans, but people engaged with it. They liked these conversations. And I continued going where there was pull through, which is a great marketing idea. Go where there's pull through, not where you think you need to go. Go where people are pulling you.
Yeah.
And then about 3 weeks later or so, I named it Coffee with Humans and then started putting graphics behind it and then changed the delivery. And now 200 episodes later, there's a countdown. There's a cool background. We play games sometimes. Allow it to develop over time, with this idea of perhaps deliver your first webinar and then think, how can I make that better? Deliver it again. How can I make that better? Deliver it again. And I guarantee you, by the time you've done a handful of times, you're going to come off with something that you would be super proud to keep around.
Yep.
All right, let's get into some tools for this webinar power process. The tools that you need. And again, you can exchange these for slightly different tools if you like. And if you want to talk through those things, it's just something that we do in our private community. All right, Google Docs. Use that for your planning process. Canva. Graphics, some video, slides. You can make t-shirts in Canva if you wanted to, but graphics, video, and slides, Canva is a great tool for that. And everything that you've seen today has been made either in Canva or Google Docs, and then delivered through Restream, and then you're watching it on your endpoints there. Render Forest. Render Forest is great, again, for not only logo development. Canva does that too, but Render Forest will also create intros or reveals, logo reveals, and they're super cool. Audio. If you need audio for the background music, for whatever you're doing, I did a podcast intro the other day, and Audio Jungle is a great place to go find royalty-free audio. And then Canva, Render Forest has royalty-free audio as well. Descript could become one of your best friends. Create transcripts, create micro content, edit your videos, super fast, super easy, super pro. And that is becoming actually more of a video development tool than it used to be. They've actually upgraded it in the past month. Google Slides. I'm delivering all my content through Google Slides. It is shared into Restream. And actually, I have I'm a little over the top. I got 3 monitors that I'm running because I'm a programmer. Like I've been programming for years, but I've got a monitor that was only delivering slides to me. So I've got those set up in a cool way. And then again, using Restream for the delivery platform. I actually put a link in LinkedIn on the comments. I hope you can see that. There's a link for Restream if you just want to go try that out. Super cool tool. Also, you could certainly try StreamYard. I started off with StreamYard. StreamYard's put in some upgrades in the past 6 months, which I think have been pretty beneficial as well. All right. Now, let's talk about the power process. Dun, dun, dun. All right.
Here we go.
This is the process that we use for creating our content. I'll just leave it over here like this. The power process: ads, intros, and outros are created using Render Forest, which then can become part of a podcast, which is delivered or live streamed via Restream. Ads, intros, and outros are also part of our community Q&A, which we deliver via Meet, Zoom, or sometimes in-app. And then webinars and trainings are delivered via Restream. Meetings and planning sessions are recorded on Meet or Zoom. And again, everything in green are the creation. Those are the creative parts. The editing parts are in yellow. And this is a pretty broad overview, but you could follow this exact process and DM us if you want a list of what we're doing here. Video clips and audiograms are created in Descript. Any sections of videos are cut in Descript. The podcast is edited in Descript or maybe Studio One. I've used Studio One. I've used some other tools as well. I'm sort of a habitual tool learner, which I think is something that everybody should get in the habit of. Just learn new tools all the time. It'll make you a better person. And then down in the lower left-hand corner, any detailed trainings that we need for part of our courses, we create those, again, using the same tools as up above, Meet or Zoom or in Restream. And then they become part of our courses. Course overviews become or are derived from section clips from our meeting and planning sessions or our webinars or our community Q&A. So when we are, and Frank, I know you've got a comment on here about how to create have your audience create content with you. We do that as part of our community Q&As and our meeting and planning sessions. And then the distribution comes here on social media, through our free community, through our courses, which are all part of our premium community. That is the process that we use in a repeatable fashion to deliver and to create, edit, and deliver a ton of content, which we've found to be very, very effective.
Yeah, a lot of what I think he's referring to there, and what is certainly germane to our process, is to teach on a regular basis. So what I mean by that is often if you are willing to get online as that person, as that authority or that provider in that space, and begin to interact and give away parts of your knowledge, what we've told people in the past is get online once a week, once every couple of weeks, and teach for half an hour. Go live on Facebook or go live on LinkedIn and see who begins to show up, who begins to become part of your audience. And as you teach on a given topic, people will begin to interact and feedback with you. And over time, you will engage that. There's other research tools that we use as well, because of course, right? You could teach a half-hour webinar on a Facebook Live or something, and people would show up and they might have questions, but it's not really relevant to what you're talking about. So, not suggesting you don't do research as well in the background, but in the private community that we're building, as well as online, part of what we do is we go out and we will speak for a certain period of time and allow people to interact with us. And that way you sort of begin to gauge what their pain points are, what they're curious about, what they want to understand, what would help them move forward. And the nice part about that is that you can, in real time, you can do that on a Google Doc. You can explain a process. You can give a teaching on a certain topic. And then you can use that to invite people. Hey, look, we're having a webinar in a few weeks. If you want to know more about it, great. In the meantime, let me know the best address or send me a DM, and I'll send you a copy of this Google Doc so you can keep it as a checklist to go through. So not the only way to do it, but one of the best ways we found to do it.
Yeah. And one of the important things in that, and we've talked extensively about this before, Paul, is that, I've been doing some of this stuff for 20 years. I did video work 20 years ago, did websites 20 years ago, before some people even had email addresses. And so some of these things, which I'm talking about, are second nature. My mind just moves through them so quickly. and I've learned to slow down and back up the train. But when you're co-creating content, like Frank is talking about, and like we do, you can not only take the research that you've done in advance using some really cool online utilities, which we've talked about in previous webinars, but you can then refine the content you think you need to deliver based on people's questions. So if I'm moving too fast through one of these topics, and then somebody goes, "Hey, stop!" Right in the middle, like even Bill's question here, "Hey, are you going to be delivering this onto this video at the end? Will you deliver a recording?" Oh, well, let's make sure we tell people that we're going to deliver a recording. Maybe we're glossing over some of these things, and we're not talking about them in the way that the community is hearing them. Again, you may think you know what you need to deliver, but you might not, and that's where, again, using webinars and taking that feedback and then iterating through the content is so important. We're winding down into our couple minutes left here. I do want to put in front of you, again, we deliver these things for free. It's part of our creative process, and then we go off and do all sorts of things, write ebooks and do trainings and do courses, and part of my goal, part of my decade plan actually, is to take my previous 2 decades of business building experience and content creation experience and extensive knowledge of tools, and then I'll pass that on. It feeds my soul. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is in our private community. We're launching this in 2023, and we have this chock full of content. You'll get a 1-year membership with in-depth training, replays, Q&As, checklists, and weekly Q&A. That's real interesting, weekly Q&A on that. So that if you have a question, if you're like, "Hey, I've got a question about Descript," cool. We will get on there. We'll do that with you. And then that goes back into the community. Rising tide lifts all boats. The founding members, if you want to get in on that, it's $149 a year. You got to order by December 23rd. Send us a DM if you want in on that community. There's also a free community on Facebook. So stay connected. We're going to do monthly networking on that as well. And then we do Q&A from time to time. But the private community is where it's at if you just want to upskill. And what is it? It's $12.41 a month, which is nothing. So $149 a year. That's going to be locked in as well for anybody who orders by December 23rd. You'll be into that community for in perpetuity. And then obviously we do on-demand consulting or reviews of your processes. If you've got a webinar that you want to deliver and you're like, "Man, I want to amp this up. I want to get everybody involved. I want to be super pro," we can help you. And then you can use those new pieces of information and new tools in all of the rest of the webinars that you're doing, which super valuable for you. And then if you want a webinar that's set up, it's done for you, get turnkey graphics set up and process maps and walk through the whole thing and a training on that, we can certainly do that for you as well. Paul, anything that I'm missing on this?
Always go back to that beginning is what I tell people. Why are you doing this? And what is in it for the viewer? What are they longing to learn? What is it that they really need? They tune into your webinar. It's because you're giving them a chance to understand better something that they're really having difficulty understanding that they know would help them. If you can stay focused on that, and remember personally as well, why am I doing this? Because this is what I've studied to do. This is my dream. This is my purpose in life. All the other things will fall into place. So make sure you're
absolutely
very clear on that up front.
Well, again, as some of our commenters on here have talked about, this is a lot of information, and I think it's highly valuable. We are using these tools right now to deliver, I think, a pretty outstanding webinar, offering you a lot of valuable information. If you want in on this, contact us to get into that private community. We're making it fast and easy, and then you can help us build the next pieces of content. Again, this is targeted content for you, so that at the end of next year, 12 months from now, you feel like you are miles ahead. I want to see radical change, radical growth, and so become part of that private community. We're gonna close this out here now, but again, DM us if you have any questions. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. And have a great Christmas season if we don't get to talk to you beforehand.
For sure.